This is a Phoropter arm on a Marco Combo 1201, and it's a little shorter than regular Phoropter arms because it is on the combo, but sometimes it gets stiff from being old and it needs to be refurbished, needs to be cleaned and re-lubed. It only has one set of bearings up here on top of the connection shaft, and there are 36 of those bearings, but to get to those we'll have to lift the connection shaft up. We'll have to take the slide bar out and the safety screw out of the connection arm and pick it up to get to those bearings. And then back here, the clamp post, there's a safety screw in this rear pivot that has to be removed, and then we can drop this clamp post down and clean that. So those are the two things we're going to be cleaning. We're going to be cleaning the connection shaft, and also we're going to clean our handle and our bushing pin. Clean this in case this needs to be cleaned and re-lubed also. We'll have to release the set screw to get the slide bar out. It's 4 mil, and then to loosen the safety screw on the connection shaft, we'll have to use a 3 millimeter. Now remember, when you put it back in, you're not tightening up all the way, because if you do, then your connection shaft won't turn at all. It's a safety screw. It's to keep it from going too far past its points. So just when you're putting it back in, don't tighten it all the way, just enough to keep the shaft turning and stopping at its designated stop pin. And once you've got those loose, then be ready with a magnet to get these bearings. And I have a magnet here. It's really strong and it's small, and I'm going to push down here and get ready to see what happens. See, this is now raising as I'm pushing down, and it exposes the bearings, and this is the connection shaft. Now as we're pulling it out, you'll notice there's some stop pins in here, and that's what your safety screw is stopping at. When you're putting it in, you're going to want to put it back in between the two longest spaces so that you have that much travel in your arm. If you put your safety screw in between the stop pins on the short, then it's only going to move that much. So when you're putting it back in, just remember it's the long area. You want the most travel. So we'll have to clean all this grease off. And to retrieve our bearings, we have our magnet, and we're just going to see if we can pick them up, whatever comes up loosely. And if it doesn't, you'll have to help it with a tool of some type. I'm going to put these bearings in a strainer here so that I can clean them without losing as many as I can. You just keep working your magnet around. If you don't have a magnet, well, just be very careful. Try not to lose them. Got all the bearings out. There's supposed to be 36. We'll count them to see if that's really 36 or not. And we're going to clean all this area. And inside here. And reinstall. Now that we have it all cleaned, we're going to be putting a light coat of grease. Here we're going to use Seal Glide. It's an all-purpose grease. I'm just going to put a light film on this area, not up here. This, you don't have to put any inside there, but in here and on top of this ridge, this bearing retainer up top, and inside here, the bearing retainer here, and inside here, this sleeve of this front pivot arm. And once we have a light film of grease in, we're going to put our bearings back in. These are 3mm bearings. They're only 35, but I have some more, so I'm adding one to make it official 36. Okay, it's all cleaned and lubricated, and now we're going to install the connection shaft. And remember, we're going to make sure that the front, where the safety screw goes in, is going to be in the large travel area. So we'll keep that in front and go ahead and insert our connection shaft. You have to lift it up while you're pushing it down. Now go ahead and screw in your safety screw, and if you wanted to, you could screw it all the way in and back it out. But if you remember what it looked like, the depth it was when you pulled it out, you could just go to there. But because we don't know, okay, that's tight all the way, now we'll back it out so that it won't interfere. Should be turning freely now, and then we can install our slide bar. And once again, we'll remember, okay, which way is it going in? It's coming out this way, because the short end's going to be over here, and the long end over there for this type of hand. So we'll put our connection shaft back in. And recalling about the distance it was, if you're not sure, you can look at where the previous mark was and get it back in about the same area in the groove, and then tighten up our set screw in the groove. And then check it. It should be moving freely. And locking. Now we could take this out and clean this, but actually we're going to wait and put it back on the pole. We're going to insert it and put some weight on it to bring this pivot arm down so that we can pull the handle, the shaft, the spring, the bushing pin. We can pull it out and clean it and put it back in easily. If you were to take this, it might be kind of hard to get it back in because these things are under pressure. So we're actually going to install it back on the pole and put some weight on it. Put a Phoropter on it to bring it down so we can work with it that way. So that's that. We'll do that later. Okay, now we're going to do this back clamp post. It also has a safety screw in here. So we'll have to loosen that out and push that out. There are no bearings in here. Once we've released our safety screw, hopefully it will come out. Yours might be hard to come out, so somehow you'll try to have to get it out. But hopefully yours won't be too bad. And we're going to clean this and clean this rear pivot, and we're going to re-grease it. We don't have to put any grease in here, because that's where the knob, the lock knob, is going to be hitting. So it doesn't have to have any grease in here to keep it from sliding. Now that we've got it cleaned and a light film of grease on this surface, and that surface, you don't need it in there or in there. And got some grease in here, down here on the bottom, and also on the bottom of here, because it's going to be rubbing metal on here. There's no bearings down here. And when we screw in our safety screw, it's going to be going in this little track. So we don't want to screw it all the way in, because then it will bite it and it will hold it. So you could screw it all in and then back it out so that it has freedom to move. Okay. And we can go ahead and insert it. Moving freely, and then we'll screw in our safety screw. Went all the way. Now we'll back it out and test it. And if you cleaned your threads on your knob, locking knob, you could clean that and put just a little bit of grease on your threads and see if everything is holding like it should. Now we're going to install it back onto the pole so that we can work on this locking assembly. We've got it on the pole now by tightening the two lock screws, and we're going to put a Phoropter on it. And remember to put a safety screw, a stopper, at the end of your Phoropter arm so that you don't lose your Phoropter. When Phoropter's on here and the doctor's loosening and tightening on and off, he might loosen the lock knob and your Phoropter fall off. So you definitely need a stopper screw, safety screw, after you put in on your Phoropter to keep that Phoropter in place so you don't lose it. So we'll go ahead and put that on and put our safety screw in here. Okay, we have our stopper safety screw installed. It's not any old bolt. It's got to fit inside the groove. So it's a special kind of screw that goes in there. And I don't know the thread pitch right now, but when I find out, I'll put it in the notes. Now that we have our Phoropter on the arm, and we can pull it down level, and now we can remove our lock knob assembly and clean it and put some more grease on it. And it might be pretty greasy. Now you're going to have a washer here that you don't want to lose. Make sure you have that, putting it back on, and you might want to clean all this area up and re-grease it with Seal Glide. Now there's a spacer under here that this has to travel through. So when you're putting it back together, you have to make sure that spacer is lined up. That's why it's sometimes easier to go ahead and put it on back on your pole to keep the pressure off of everything going back together. So we're going to go ahead and clean that and put some more Seal Glide grease on that and the inside of the spring pin. Once we've cleaned this locking assembly and re-greased it inside of the threads and everywhere, and cleaned inside here and put some more grease back in there, just a light film of grease, a light coating of grease. Then we can go ahead and reinsert our locking handle into this bushing pin that's going through from the other side. So when you're going back in, you may have to fiddle with the spacer that's underneath to line it up. And so while you're going in, you may have to kind of move the arm up and down to get everything to line up. So you might have to shake it, move it around, and finally get it in until you can start screwing it into that bushing pin. Okay, once you've got it in, you can test it, see if it's locking, if it's moving freely when you loose it, and then freezes when you lock it. You drop it at whatever distance you want, whatever height you want, everything locks in, you're good. Now, if your Phoropter arm was moving when you put your Phoropter on and it sagged, or you put it on and it raised up, that would mean that maybe your Phoropter arm needs to be balanced so that when the doctor's moving it, it's not going to move. Once he moves it up or down, it's going to stay in place. So he's not constantly trying to put pressure on it to keep it in place, and he only has to lock it in when he's finally lined up. So he doesn't want to be wrestling with making it go up or down on its own. He wants to be able to be doing that. So if we needed to adjust the tension on the Phoropter arm, we would go behind this plate. Now, looking at our diagram once again, what we're aiming for is to find the crank, where we can crank the springs to make them tighter or looser depending on what your arm needed to do. So to get to this crank, which is under this cover, we've got to take the covers off, and on the covers there's a screw and a little spacer that's on the screw, and there might be a washer, and then that screws into the arm pin. Now sometimes getting these screws out, they're hard to turn, so you might have to take the arm off, put it on the ground, and really crank it to loosen those Phillips screws. So we're going to see if we can loosen them right here in the air, and we'll use our Phillips. They're going to be on pretty tight, so be aware of that. And if you're finding that you're just stripping out your Phillips, or if you're finding the other side is turning, use another Phillips on the other side, and to keep it from spinning, and see if you can unscrew it. But if it's still too tight, lay it on the ground and put your Phillips into the screw, and as you're putting pressure on it, hit it with your hammer while you're trying to turn it. Just keep tapping on that while you're putting pressure on it, and if you hit it hard, it will free those threads up and it might loosen. But that's a method for getting screws that are really tight, is to hit it with a hammer to dislodge whatever's holding those threads so that you can unscrew it. So these have already been loosened. I had to use a hammer, and I actually put it on the ground to loosen these. So that's what had to happen. So we'll go ahead and take these screws off and get to that crank. So I've got both sides loose, and I'm going to lay it backwards to try to catch any washers and spacers that are on the screws. And here's the setup on this side. The other side's the same way. You have there's a washer here, and by pulling out the screw, you'll notice there's a small little spacer on that. And if you look at the holes on this little cover, they're not perfectly round. They're sort of rectangular, so there's room for them to move. So both sides. So that's what the screw with the little spacer on it allows that to move if necessary and when necessary. So both sides have the same setup. Now we can get to our crank. Our crank is in here. So here's the crank. So you'll notice it's got little notches on the wheel here, and it's screwed into the back of this spring. And so if I were to turn it clockwise, it would pull the spring towards it, and it would make the arm tighter. But if it were too tight, if the springs were too tight, then I would go counterclockwise and lengthen the spring so that it loses some of its tension. So you'll have to get a screwdriver of some type, and you'll have to find out which size fits best. And if you're moving one way, well, you can pry up against the frame here and moving that crank whichever way it needed to move, or the other way. And depending on how long it's been in that position, it might not want to move easily, so you're going to have to keep moving it until it frees up and stays where you move it. So, and you'll have to do both sides. Do one side and the other side, and do them equal amounts so that spring is equal. There's two springs, so that they're the equal distance and equal pressure. So that's how you adjust that. And once you have it the way you like it, it's level and stays when you have it in the position you've pushed it to, then maybe you're good. And now you can put your cover back on. But before we do, there's two more things in here that you might want to be aware of. There are stops. There are stops in here that keep the arm from going up too high or down too low. And those stops can be adjusted. Inside here, there's a Allen screw, And this one happened to have broken off, but it's in here. If you were to look up in here, you would see this Allen screw. And you can adjust this so that when you're pushing your arm up, actually, see, this is where the top of that screw actually hits on top of the cover. So when you're going up, it's going to hit this screw, and it will stop depending on how long you have this stop. So you can adjust how high it's going to the travel that it's going to stop on, and it's the same in the back. You have another one back here that if you look in here, you can see the Allen screw, and it will adjust the lower limit. So you have an upper limit and a lower limit, and you can adjust that if that's important to you. You don't want it. You never want it to go lower than that. Well, then you would need to adjust your limit screw, and the same on the front. If you never wanted it to go too much higher, you would need to adjust that front pivot limit screw. Once you have it all back, then you can go ahead and put your covers back on. Remember, you'll have a washer, you have a screw with a little spacer on it, and we'll put those back on. Now the other side of this locking assembly, where you have the bushing pin and you have a little spring pin, and that's what you're turning your lock axle shaft into, and so that little pin needs to be there. That will keep this bushing from turning. If that pin is out of place, then it's going to be turning, and you won't be able to lock your arm. So on this side, just remember that pin needs to be in there. There's a little hole drilled in there. You can't really switch putting the arm and the handle on this side because there's no hole. I guess if you drilled a hole into the lower arm here on the other side and inserted that pin so that this bushing wouldn't turn, I guess you could make it work. And also the cover. And look at the cover. The cover's a little different. It's got like a little fender on it, and this fender goes around this head of this bushing pin. So you don't have to mix those up because these are a little different. And make sure it's tight. Make sure these are tight. These screws up here, and both your front and your rear pivot. And make sure they're tight, and you should be good. Just looking at the diagram one last time, everything should be familiar to you now. Your important stopper screw at the end to keep that Phoropter from falling off. Your crank area to adjust everything. Your limit screws in the front and the rear, and your bearings, your locking handle assembly, and I tried to write the names of the parts on the diagram, but if you wanted to verify it, that's what you have. No part numbers.